Some real key tips are
that there are particular terms where men and boys switch off or they disengage from the message.
there's various ways that men like to be embodied in.
Text. Men in Focus. Practitioner Reflections 5. Practical Tips for Engaging Men. Text. Men in Focus. Practitioner Reflections 4. Working with Men in Violence Prevention. Our watch acknowledges the Wurundjeri Woi people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional owners of the land on which this video was produced. We pay our respects to all traditional owners past and present, and recognize the continuing connection Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have to land, culture, knowledge and language for over 65,000 years, and their leadership in preventing violence against women. Our watch works to prevent violence against all women. We use the word women inclusively, meaning both cisgender and transgender women. Our watch logo. Participants in this video speak individually, whilst seated in a studio. A stylized image of Jackson Fairchild appears. Jackson stands beside a garden, and peers at the flowers. Text. Jackson Fairchild, they them primary prevention leader.
You've only got a few moments to connect with someone and to get their attention. And if someone feels that you don't understand them, that their own unique experiences aren't being acknowledged, they're less likely to connect and to open up a conversation.
A stylized image of Mac Cone appears. Mac sits on a weightlifting bench, surrounded by dumbbells. Text. Mac Cone, he they. Program Coordinator, R4 Respect, YFS.
It's making sure that people feel like they have a voice, regardless of what their opinion is, that they're actually able to express what they think in a safe space.
By acknowledging that person's position, who they are, and what they're getting right and what they value, you can help create connection.
A stylized image of Craig Rigney appears. Craig holds a bunch of carrots and smiles at the camera. Text. Craig Rigney, CEO, KWY Aboriginal Corporation, Cornung Wurundjeri Man.
That's what's going to create a safe space for those men to show their true selves, for those men to let their emotions out, for those men to lower their stress level, for those men to feel good about themselves.
A stylized image of Cassie Lindsay appears. She stands next to a volleyball net, with a ball at her feet. Text. Cassie Lindsay, she, her, co-founder, Red Consulting and Training.
There's a lot of men I've found in this work who just actually don't want to say the wrong thing, so they don't say anything at all. But if you have a relationship, hopefully they can ask you the curious questions.
A stylized image of Sarah Chong appears. Sarah smiles at the camera and an aeroplane flies over her head. Text. Sarah Chong, she, her, multicultural community leader.
A lot of the time, a lot of the men may not initially say anything to us there because they feel that there's a sense of pride. But the more that you build that rapport with them, the more that you build the relationship, the more that you build that culturally safe space there and be open and honest, then the more that they actually start to open up.
In order to have the challenging conversations about some of the stuff that we need to change, we first need to establish a common ground. And I think a strengths-based approach that acknowledges what people's values are and what their hopes for themselves are and their ideas about what makes a good society and a good family, I think that's a really great place to start.
What I'm seeing resonate most in some of this work is around the man box, because it is a great way to show that these systems and attitudes and behaviours are having impacts. Also, I find videos incredibly useful, stories that you can show, particularly if we haven't got people in the room who feel safe to share their personal story.
Aboriginal men have all told us one thing. No one has ever asked us how we're feeling. Well, firstly, we need to discuss the use of violence and to unpack that use of violence. What we also need to do is unpack some historical, traumatic-based conversations that are going on in his mind with him as well. So we need to add a cultural aspect to that, but also that's been trauma-informed. Because if they don't understand themselves, how are they going to make change?
I do share personal stories, real life stories that hopefully they can relate to, that kind of transforms their own individual attitudes and behaviours, but also hopefully create safety in the room, that people within the room share their stories. Because I actually think that's where the most transformational change happens.
The one important factor is not to look at openly shaming men in their views and ideologies, their perceived ideas around perhaps like family violence or gendered roles or like, women's empowerment can be very different to what we understand them as that. So I feel that it's very important there to give them that opportunity to understand what exactly it is that we mean when we talk about masculinity. What do we mean when we talk about women's empowerment?
And sometimes I find meeting with men who, if they're the leader, is really useful as well, because you get an idea of what's their personal take on this, build the relationships.
The whole community benefits, that's the way that we would start approaching it. I think that, in doing so, it's more successful that we start engaging men there and that they actually stay in the room.
There's various ways that men like to be embodied in. And I'm also finding men are really saying, tell me what to say, tell me what to do. I just want to know what's the right thing. So programs that can really support that. So it's not a performative allyship, it's true active allyship. I think there's men who want to do that, and us as experts have a role to walk alongside them.
Text. Tips on messaging. A stylized image of Shane Tass appears. Shane holds a tennis racket and ball. He serves the ball. Text. Shane Tass, he, him, principal advisor, masculinities, our watch.
It's really important that messaging is appropriate for the audience that you're seeking to engage and work with. So for example, in our Watch's campaign for young people called The Line, it's really important that young people's voices are at the centre of that. And in fact, young people can see it a mile if it's being written for them by people that are not them.
A stylized image of Shelley Hewson Monroe appears. Shelley stands on a surfboard and flexes her arms. Text. Shelley Hewson Monroe, she, her. Manager Prevention, Masculinities and Learning, RMIT.
A lot of the work that I do is about really adapting language. And so some real key tips are use the evidence base, but not as a way to have a straight byline. Don't have it in the title. If you are designing a program or a pilot well, that's already the evidence. We're having sex and consent snack clubs. That's our title. So your bylines, your communication lines across social media or even in internal email don't need to be so much about the product, but about how to get to the product, how to get to the program. And it does need to be catchy. And think about images, are they actually showing a gender or preferencing a look? Engaging men in a way that they're not all smiling, because that turns off a lot of people.
We make sure that we are going to where young people are at, so on the social media platforms that they're engaging with, to make sure that it's really relevant and that it speaks to them.
Or if we use big words like, let's dismantle the patriarchy, we get met with blank, blank, blank.
So we know from the research that was done by Common Cause and Vic Health a number of years ago that there are particular terms where men and boys switch off or they disengage from the message. So when we use terms like toxic masculinity, it gets taken as though it's blaming individual men, rather than thinking about it as a broad social problem that we're all in. And that we also need to be addressing it at the broader social level.
A stylized image of Natalie Russell appears. Natalie holds a guitar and smiles at the camera. Text. Natalie Russell, she, her. Sector engagement lead, our watch.
I think there's some great examples around values-based messaging that we can use that really challenge some of the framing that we often hear that's not, positive or strengths-based. And some of the narrative that perhaps works better with younger men is talking about outdated forms of masculinity or outdated masculine stereotypes.
Text. Using positive role models for change.
It is absolutely helpful the way they role model the relationship we have up the front, but also how they role model their vulnerability. And I can see how that helps other men in the room engage or reflect and think about how this is impacting them.
A stylized image of Hala Abdelner appears. Hala is rock climbing. Text. Hala Abdelner, she, her, CEO and founder, Institute of Nonviolence.
I did go around and interview young boys about who their role models are. A lot of it was centered around having a really good body, being really successful and just having fancy cars. But what was really beautiful too is they started reflecting on the men in their families that they looked up to and particular traits that they loved in those men. And mostly they talked about those men being nurturing towards their families. So if we can harness that in society, I think that could be really good for men.
Text. Supports available. 1-800-RESPECT. National Sexual Assault, Domestic Family Violence Counseling Service. 1-800-737-732. Men's Referral Service. Operated by No to Violence. 1-300-766-6491. Australian Human Rights Commission. 1-300-656-419. 13 1392-76. Sane. We're people like you. 1-800-187-263. Q Life. 1-800-184527. This video is a part of a suite of Men in Focus practice resources produced by Our Watch and supported by the Australian Government Department of Social Services. Visit ourwatch.org.au. Our Watch. Preventing violence against women.